Okay, so we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations by graphing and factoring. And so today we're going to do examples 1 and 2. And so in this picture it shows us a soccer ball being kicked. And with that soccer ball being kicked, we can actually write a quadratic function that would work for the path of the soccer ball. And we could determine when the ball hits the ground, what time it hits the ground. And by using that, we can either factor or use a table or a graph to be able to find the zeros, the place where it's going to hit the ground. Another word for zeros are the x-intercepts, so where it crosses the x-axis. And so we're going to talk about using a graph or a table for that today, and using factoring to be able to find it. Now, unlike linear functions, which always have one factor, or one zero, or x-intercept, quadratic functions could have two of them, which is what we see quite often as in this picture. But there could also just be one, or sometimes there are none if it doesn't cross the x-axis at all. So first of all, we're going to find the zeros by using a graph or a table. Now, you can do this by hand if you wanted to be able to find them. It just becomes a little bit harder doing it by hand. But with the technology that we have, we're going to talk about how to do it with technology. So basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to solve this equation. And I'm going to show you how to use the technology you have if you're in class, you have a graphing calculator to work with, or even if you're home, show you a graphing calculator online that you can use that will also help you to find those zeros. So first of all, our calculator that we have, if I graph this, function first of all, and let's see if it'll cooperate with me this morning. Okay, it likes me well enough. And so I can, let's see, hold on. Has a y-intercept of positive 8. So to graph this, then the graph will look like this. Now what this graph shows me is that by looking at the graph here, I can see that it crosses the x-axis at positive 2 and positive 4. So in this question it says find the zeros. So my answer is going to be that the zeros are at 2 and 4. All right, you don't have to put x equals, we just refer to them as the zeros are these numbers. If I'm using my graphing calculator I have here, so we've got x squared and minus 6x and plus 8. So with my calculator, I can hit zoom 6 and I can see the graph here. And in standard viewing window it goes by 1, so I count it from 0. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So at 2 and at 4 I have zeros. Or I can go to my table and I can find where the value of y is 0 for the value of x. And so I can see here that when x is 2, y is 0. When x is 4, y is 0. So my zeros would be at 2 and 4 there also. So that's using your graphing calculator to do it. Say you're at home, don't have a graphing calculator, then you can go to a calculator online. And all I did here is just search for a free online graphing calculator. And let me put in here's how you would type it in. Let me clear this out first of all. So we have x squared minus 6x and plus 8. So there it is right there, and as soon as I hit graph then, it will graph this for me. So here it shows once again the zeros are 2 and 4. And if I look at my table, we can see that in the table here also, it shows me a 0 at 2 and a 0 at 4. So there's finding the zeros by using a calculator, by graphing, or a table. Okay? And you can do it by hand, or you could actually you could do it also if you wanted to by making the actual table by hand also. Okay, now we're going to talk about using factoring to do it. And when we're talking about factoring, we're talking about, actually we're looking at finding the roots of an equation. So finding the zeros is the same as finding the roots of an equation. So the solutions to a quadratic equation are actually the roots, solutions, zeros. There's a lot of different names for them. But what we're going to be doing is that we're going to be, if you remember, we're going to be using the zero product property once again. And the zero product property says that if I have two numbers and I multiply them together to equal 0, then either one of them has to equal 0 or the other one does. And we're going to go back through that complete steps for doing this. So when we want to solve by factoring or find the zeros, first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the equation equal to 0, or set the function equal to 0. And then we'll factor. So in factor here we get x minus 6 and x plus 2 is equal to 0. The factors of negative 12, then when I combine them we get negative 4 or negative 6 and 2. So now we're going to use the zero product property to solve this, which means then that if this product equals 0, then either x minus 6 equals 0 or x plus 2 equals 0. So when I solve them, I get x equals 6 or negative 2. So I add 6 to both sides, I get 6, subtract 2 and get 2. Okay? So there's one example. We'll do one more here. It says g of x equals 3x squared plus 18x. So first thing I do is set it equal to 0. Now if you remember, the first thing you're always supposed to do when you're factoring is look for a common factor, the greatest common factor. In this case, that's 3x. So we take out 3x and we're left with x plus 6 equals 0. So once again, I'm going to use a zero product property, which says that either this factor equals 0 or this factor equals 0. So this one here, these here always give students more problems just because for some reason not having a plus or minus there makes it a little bit harder for them to see. But if you always just take that part and set it equal to 0, and so if I divide by 3, we get x equals 0 and subtract 6 or negative 6. So that's how we solve them by factoring and with graphing in the table.